get started today, I just want to let you all know that the bulk of the information shared today came from the Real Spelling Toolbox, which can be found at tbox2.com. This is a paid subscription resource, but I find it to be very helpful in digging into some of those niggly bits related to morphology. And if this is an area of interest to you, I highly recommend paying the subscription for this resource. We're talking today about complex plurals. And as you know, my inspiration for morphology work can come from anywhere.
Oh, you have never faced anything like this.
The chameleon is the power of all my old nemesises. Nemesi?
As we talk about complex plurals, I just want to mention they may be referred to as irregular plurals, both in the curriculum and various resources. I always get a little nervous when I hear the word irregular because it implies that it's maybe doing something wrong or not normal, when that is not the case. It's just not following what we perceive to be the quote unquote proper way of building plurals. The ES, or shortened form, the clipped form S, as a suffix right now is the only productive plural suffix in English. And what that means is any new words that are coming into English spelling will be pluralized using S or ES, depending on its structure. Interestingly enough, this suffix is not native to English. It did not exist in Old English times, which is why we have words that don't appear to quote unquote follow the rules when it comes to pluraling. Those words have likely come from other places. So English originally formed its plurals in three ways. We either saw a stem vowel shift, as we see from foot to feet or goose to geese. We might have seen adding en, and there's only a handful of these that still exist. Oxen is a great example. One ox, many oxen. We also might have seen in Old English spelling a combination of a vowel change and a suffix, which we see in the example of brother, singular, going to brethren. Many of these Old English words have a Germanic background, and there's many here that you can see. Some of them might be ones that were familiar to you. The one that blew my mind was penny, singular, pence, plural. So if you have 12 pence, it's 12 pennies. Some words remain unchanged in their plural form. This could be because of the borrowing of them from another language, like the word moose. Moose is an indigenous word, and it was not pluralized in its original use. And when adopted, we also did not pluralize the word. Lego is an interesting one. It's a commercial brand name, and as part of their brand identity security, they have a whole blurb on their website about how Lego is both singular and plural. So the word Legos is not a thing. It's one Lego or many Lego. Fish is also pretty interesting because fish can be plural if there's many of the same species, but if we have more than one species, we tend to use the word fishes. So we start to see here that we have words that take on multiple forms depending on the context for the plural. Some words have no singular. So cattle is always plural, or shears are always plural. Some words appear to be plurals, but are actually singulars. So news is a single thing, even though it appears to be plural with that S on the end. So we can have a conversation about how sometimes the S is just part of the word. It's not forming a plural. Now we get into understanding how the origin of the singular influences its plural form. So when you have Latin words from Latin origin, whose singular forms end in the letters that you see in the left-hand side of the column, their plurals are formed with the letters that you see on the right-hand side. At the bottom, there's a collection of words. This is not an exhaustive list. It is merely a sample. of words that are ending in those singular letters, and then you could ask students to work through and figure out what would they become in their plural form. Now, some words have both a Latin and an English plural used in different contexts. So the example given here is formulae, which is typically found in a math science context, but we use the word formulas in other contexts. So there may be times where, just like fish and fishes, we might find multiple plurals within English language for the same word. Greek words, we have ending in is or ending in on. Obviously here, the plural forms in the right-hand side. So if the Kung Fu Panda Po was wondering, nemesis becomes nemesis. Again, a sampling of words here that you could explore with your students to talk about what form they take. There's only a handful of French words that we have borrowed into English spelling where we see the plural of being formed by the addition of the X on the end. Something to keep in mind, of course, that the pronunciation of the word doesn't change. We just see a change in spelling. Now, the apostrophe, of course, sneaks its way into all kinds of pluraling, particularly at the grocery store. I'm convinced it's just to drive me insane. But there are 2 times, very particular cases, where you can use an apostrophe to build a plural. In all other cases, no, no, no. So if we have a short word that's out of the grammatical context, and we're talking about that word, then we can put an apostrophe to build the plural so that it doesn't get confused. Remember, English spelling is all about comprehension in its written form. So as we were reading, you must remember the do's and don'ts. If we saw it spelt without the apostrophe and it was just DOS, there would be an element of confusion around what exactly that is or what that means. What is a DOS? So we have the apostrophe there to just create clarity. Notice the apostrophe does not exist for the word don'ts. The other place that we're going to see an apostrophe used for plural is when we're talking about a single letter. So in the first example, there are 3 A's in banana. If we didn't have the apostrophe there, it would be spelled AS. And of course, that's the word as. And it wouldn't make sense for us to read there are 3 as in banana. So we have the apostrophe there to help create clarity. Now, once upon a time, you may have been taught that abbreviations can have apostrophes for plurals. Depending on the style guide, you might still see that in use, but for the most part, that apostrophe has been removed. So if we look at the acronym DVDs or CDs, it is not spelt with an apostrophe S. It would just be spelt by adding the S. The same is true for decades and dates. So if we're talking about the 1950s, we would just write the numbers 1950 with an S added on the end. No apostrophe needed. Now, what about the spelling of children? What's going on there? Well, this one has a very interesting history. In Old English, it was the same word for singular and plural. And I don't speak Old English, but the word child was the same if there was 1 child or 10 child. Same word, just like deer and moose in our contemporary English spelling. Then somewhere along the way, it picked up a U to help designate or set it apart from the singular to the plural. In early Middle English, we see further evolution where they added RE as a suffix to build out the pluraling. So child would be single, and then CHILDRE would be the plural form. Now, this is where things get interesting because there's a little bit of divergent depending on where you are in England. But in Southern British English, they actually added on an additional suffix, and that's the spelling that caught on and rose to the surface, if you will, and stayed with us as how we spell the word. And so they added an en, which is the same en that we would see at the end of oxen or brethren, to an already existing suffix re that was there to show the pluraling. And so we actually have a double suffix on the end of child to show that it is pluraled. Really, really plural. All right, just for fun, what is the plural of octopus? Most people would respond octopi, and those people would be wrong. What happened here was a false understanding or belief that octopus came from Latin. Just think cactus to cacti, but actually octopus comes to us from Greek. With that in mind, the plural should have been octopodes. And you might see that in some people's references. However, the agreed upon pluraling for octopus is octopuses. Here's a fun fact for you. The Italian singular suffix o becomes an I in its plural form. So these words that we have borrowed into English spelling are already plural: spaghetti, graffiti, confetti. So if you have a single spaghetti noodle, you actually have a spaghetto. And if you've just had a party and you find a single piece of confetti, you've actually found a confetto. Something you could do with your students is, you've got a few minutes left at the end of the day, ask them where these words might come from based on their plural form. So we have tooth and it's gone to teeth. We see a vowel shifting here. So that one must have come from Old English. We have thesis, pluralizing here and going to theses. So we must have this word coming to us from Greek. And here we have cactus going to cacti, and that one comes to us from Latin. And of course, an example here where we have chateau becoming chateau with that X, and it comes to us from French. A quick note about writing word sums when we have these complex plurals. So because we can't represent the word sum with suffixing like we would in a typical word sum where we're adding prefixes and suffixes to a base element, you put the word plural in these little curlicue brackets. Similarly, this is also done when we see a shift for a past tense word that has changed its structure. So FOOT plus plural is rewritten as FEET, feet. And lastly, let's talk about word families. Now, because we see a shift in structure, remember, to belong in a word family and be represented here in a word matrix, it has to share meaning and structure. Well, obviously it shares meaning because we know it's the plural form of this base word, foot. However, it has shifted structure. Because of that, it does not live inside of the word matrix or the word family. It lives adjacent, if you will. So if foot lives in the house, then feet might like live in the garage, if you need an analogy. Essentially, if I was working with students and displaying word families in the classroom, or if they had a word notebook where they're gathering this information, I would put it next to the word matrix so students could understand that although foot and feet are not housed in the same matrix, they do share that connection and meaning, but because of its origins as an Old English word, it is one of those complex plurals, and so the plural cannot live inside of the word matrix.